Alright, so welcome back everybody. So for this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to play Shake That City, and it's by AEG Games. So I'll get started to show you guys how to play this game. Let's get started. So I'm not going to go too in-depth here on the setup, but when it comes to setting up this game, these bonus tiles, they are going to be set up on the table around this board by this exact pattern. So if, for instance, you were setting out the table and your friends haven't sat down yet, you would set up a board over here on my left, and even though they would be sitting on the left side of the table, the tiles and the board would be facing my direction like this for them, even though they're facing a different way. Same thing with the player who is sitting over here. The tiles would be in a particular order just like this, but for him, the tiles will be closer and then going to his right, you know, because he's sitting on that side of the table, and so on and so on. So regardless of how it would look normally to other people, it's going to be a different look. The tiles are going to be on a different side for each player. They're not going to be exactly the same like this. I mean, physically, they're going to be exactly the same. If you're looking at it from this standpoint, they will look exactly the same for the other player boards, but it will be a different orientation for the other players looking at their player boards. So, but anyways, I don't want to get too caught up in that. So just make mental note that if you're playing a 4-player game, you're going to set out the board, one board here, one board over here, doesn't matter which side, one board there, and then the tiles, even if you're playing a 3-player game or a 2-player game, doesn't matter. You're going to set up the tiles as if you were playing from this direction, even though you're setting it up for your friends in, obviously, a different orientation. It will be a different orientation for them, but it will be set up just like this for the other 3-player boards. Okay, so now that I've explained that, let's move on to actually how you play this game. So we have this cube shaker here. So you'll gather all the cubes and you'll place them in this cube shaker, okay? And then you're allowed to shake them like so, but you don't want to necessarily lift and shake. You just want to shake on the ground as good as you can. And then once you do that, you want to kind of get it into a spot so its orientation of Shake That City cube shaker here is like this. You don't want it like this. For instance, you want it like this exactly. And then, so as straight as possible. And then you just simply push that in. And then once you do, you just lift up. And you'll notice we have an orientation of cubes. We've got 2 black ones on the bottom, a green, 2 blue, a red, a black, a blue, and a red. Okay? So let's just zoom in a little bit. So you see that's how it looks. That's how it's going to look every time. So the orientation is going to stay the same, which is good to note. Now let me zoom back out. Now, what you're going to do is the way the round will work, okay? And there's 15 rounds in the game. So we have a little, token here to remind us what round we're in, okay? So the way the rounds are going to work is one player, the active player, is going to shake the city, and then they're going to do just what I did. They're going to push this in and release the cubes like that. Then, because they're the active player, so, whoever's active player first, they're going to pick a color that they want. Now, they have an option. They can pick the 3 black, or the 3 blue, the 1 green, or the 2 red, okay? But they can't pick multiple colors. They can only pick one color. Not only that, but what color they pick has to go in that exact orientation for them. Exact. So, for instance, if I was to choose the 3 blue, the exact orientation would be something like, I don't know, like this, for instance. Okay, that would be the exact orientation. If I was to go like this, that is not the exact orientation, okay? Now, if I was just grabbing the 1 green one, it wouldn't matter because it's just 1 tile that I'm taking for that color, okay? But yes, it has to be the exact orientation as you see it exactly. okay? But that means you can kind of move these around where they can fit, you know, like there, like for instance, that would work too. So an orientation like that, obviously. So for the black, obviously there's going to be a row that separates them. So like these black tiles, 2 of them could go here, but then the other one would have to go like, for instance, here. That would be an acceptable orientation for the tiles. And that's what you're going to do. Now, once you've chosen a color and have placed your tiles out, the other players are free to choose any color that you didn't choose. So since I have black out here, my opponents could pick blue, or they could pick red, or they could pick green, okay? And then they would place it out on their exact orientation for them, whatever that may be, okay? So that's how that would work. Now, after you had done that and everyone else had placed out their tiles, then that would end the first round and you would move the marker up accordingly to the next round, which would be round 2, for instance, right? And then you would, obviously, the next player to your left or right or whatever rotation you're playing would be the active player, and they would get to shake the city, a cube shaker here. But before they do that, they would put all of the cubes that are out, and they would put it right back into the cube shaker, and then shake it once again, and then they would get to do this as well. So everyone's going to get a chance to, at least a few times, they're going to all get a chance to shake the city, and obviously take out the cubes like so, okay? Just like that. Now, that's basically how the rounds are going to work, okay? Now, whenever you take one of these cubes out, let's say your board is starting to get pretty full. You're never allowed to take cubes that you can't take. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say I had a huge board full and I had everything full and I had to take I decided I wanted to take the 2 red ones and I wanted to put them here. But as you can see, there's a factory here, so I couldn't put it here. But let's just say every other tile was completely filled with tiles and this was the only orientation. That means I couldn't take the red, but I could still take the blue because it's by itself. So you can never take cubes, or should I say you can never take the corresponding tiles with the cubes of that color if you can't fit it in here at exactly as you see it, okay? That means if there are no cubes you can take, then that means you don't get a turn that round. You miss your turn for that round. And as the game gets closer to an end, that might be happening a lot more often, for sure. But that's how that's going to work. Now, remember, even though your opponents, for instance, they take a color that they want, and you have to choose a different color. If they were to take a color that would have worked with your orientation, if they had taken a color that would have worked with your orientation, you still can't pick the color that they took, regardless of whether it would work for your orientation or not, even if it's the only orientation for that round that would work for you. So I guess your opponents can see that and mess with you. So that could potentially be, obviously, some competitiveness going on for sure on that one, preventing you from being able to take a turn that round. That could be potentially a possibility. But most likely that won't be towards the end of the game. Now you'll notice on this little round marker thing, the 13, the 14, and the 15, they have a slightly different color orientation going on with those numbers. So once you get your round marker to the 13, 14, or 15 location, then any player, regardless of who the active player is, any player can take whatever color that they want that they can put onto their player board. So that's allowed, which is nice. That's how that would work, though. So that's what you get to do for the last 3 rounds, okay? But basically, yeah, you'll do that, and then obviously, that's basically the entire flow of the game. Now, obviously, we've only talked about the flow of the game. We haven't talked about how to get victory points. So let's talk about how to get victory points. Well, one of the ways you can get victory points is if you can fulfill the needs of one of these bonus tiles, okay? Now, you'll notice there are 2 different things on these bonus tiles here, and then this one is obviously a little different. So this one, okay, this bonus tile will award you 3 victory points if you can manage to get 2 of all 5 colors. Okay, so each of the colors are obviously a different type of building. So these black ones are factories. So you'd have to have 2 factories. You would have to have 2 roads. You would have to have 2 of these blue shops. Okay, 2 of these blue shops. You'd have to have 2 parks. So these green ones are the parks. And you'd have to have 2 homes or houses, which are these red ones, okay? You'd have to have all of them, but you'd have to have 2 of each. And then once you do, you would just flip this over, and then at the end of the game, you're going to be scoring points for each one of these tiles you flip over. Now, this one is obviously the most unique, while the others have some differences, but they're basically the same. Now, this orientation here means if you see this, as in this direction, or these, or these, or this, or this, if you can fill up this entire row, then that means you can flip this over for 3 victory points. It doesn't matter what the tiles are, they just have to be filled in. That means this row can be filled in, that means this row can be completely filled in, and you would get to flip those 3 tiles over. If you completely fill in this column here, then you'd get to flip over this tile. If you can completely fill in this column, you'd get to flip over this tile. If you completely fill in this column, you would get to flip over this tile. However, there is another way for each tile that you can flip them over. So for this particular orientation, if you can get 4 roads in this row, you can flip this bonus tile over. If you can get 4 parks or green tiles in that row, you can flip that tile over. In that row, if you can get 4 houses or 4 red tiles, you can flip that tile over. In this column here, if you can get 4 blue tiles, then you can flip that tile over. If you can get 4 black or factory tiles, then you can flip over that tile. And this one is, there are 5 different types of tiles in this game, so if you can get 1 of 4 of them, so if you can at least get 4 of the 5 into this column here, then you can flip over this tile that way. So there are obviously a couple of different ways you can flip over these tiles for bonus victory points. But what are these worth on their own? Well, this orientation here, each of these factories is actually worth 1 point. This factory by itself is worth 0 points. So they're each going to be scoring differently based on certain things. So the factories will score you 1 point each for each factory. For each 2 factories that are next, you just have to have another factory against it. So for instance, if I had another factory adjacent to this one's still only worth 1 point, even though it has 2 factories adjacent to it. But this one would be worth 1 point, and this one would be worth 1 point because they're each adjacent to a factory. The only way you can get this factory to be worth more than 1 point is if it's not also connected to just simply a factory, but also connected to a road. So if this road was connected to this factory is scoring you 2 points because it's connected to at least 1 factory and at least 1 road. That means these are still only worth 1 point. Now, if this was the orientation over here where we had a road connected to this factory up here, now this factory is now worth 1 point because it's adjacent to a road. That's how the factories are going to score you points. They're going to be basically only scoring you points if they're connected to other factories or roads. That's the orientation and scoring points-wise for those, at least for the factory tiles. Now, the roads on their own are only worth points if they're connected to an end. So if they're connected to the outer section of your player board, then they're worth 1 point. So this one here is worth 1 point. This road by itself is 0 points because it's not connected to here. But if you were to connect it via other roads, then you could make all the roads worth 1 point. So this orientation here means that this road is worth 1 point, so is this one, so is this one, so is this one. That's how that works. So they're just going to score you 1 point at most. They'll never score you more than 1 point. They're just worth 1 point each, and only if they're connected to, obviously, this outer area. Now, a diagonal is not considered adjacent in this game. And so that means these two would be worth 0 points because they're not connected to the outside. This one would still give you a point. This one would still give you a point because they're connected to the outside. But these two are not adjacent. They're not, so that means they're not connected, and so therefore they're not giving you victory points. But that's how that's going to work. Now, let's talk about the shops, the blue buildings. How are they going to score you victory points? Well, a shop on its own that isn't connected to the outer road, so you can consider this border a road, if you will. You can consider this outer part of the player board just a giant road that surrounds your player board. So if you have a shop on the end, this is worth a point. If you have a shop here by itself with no roads nearby, then it's 0 points, okay? Same thing with this one. Now, let's change the equation. We know that this one gives you a point because it's connected to the outer edge, but these don't give you victory points at the moment, but we can fix that problem. If you can connect a road to a shop, then you can make it so it's going to be worth victory points. Now, sorry. Now, if it doesn't matter, this road doesn't have to be here for this shop to score a point because it's already on the edge. But this one here, you'll notice this color is kind of brown, right? And you're probably wondering, why is this considered green? Why is this considered brown? And why is this considered gray? And that's for this orientation, this type of building, this shop building. It scores you victory points based on where it is. So the shops in the green area only will score you 1 point max, okay? And they will always score you 1 point because they're all touching the borderline. Now, these buildings here, these shops, if they're in this inner ring here, or outer ring, or whatever you want to call it, the brown ring, they will score you 2 points if they're connected to a road, okay? So if they're connected to a road, you can make your shops worth 2 points that way. And if you can get a shop into the center and also connect it via a road, then you can make this shop worth 3 victory points. That's a lot, considering this is the only tile that can score you 3 victory points. So that's how that's going to work. Sorry, I have a frog in my throat at the moment for some reason. Anyways, so the shop here is going to get you 3 points if it's in the center and obviously still connected to a road. So it's the only one that's going to give you 3 points, shop-wise anyways. But that's how shops work. That's how they score. Now, let's talk about houses. They're next. So a house on its own will always score you 2 victory points. If it's by itself, it will always score you 2 victory points. So if you have these 2 houses here separated from each other, they're going to score you 2 points, which is nice, right? But if you were to put a third house in the mix, then instead of scoring 2 separate points for each, you've now connected them, and so now they're only worth 2 points max together. So a grouping of houses will decrease your victory points in this game. You want to keep your houses separated from other houses to score the most points, obviously. Now, if you ever put a factory next to a house, then that means it's 0 points. So you don't want to put houses next to factories because they're worth 0 points, okay? That's the only one, that's the only building that if it's adjacent to a house, will it give you no points at all for, obviously, the house and the factory. So factories and houses, they just don't go together in this game. Now, what about, for instance, parks? Because they're the only building that we haven't actually talked about. So a park will score you 1 point if they're adjacent to a house. So this park here will score you a point because it's adjacent to this house. That means that this little park over here by itself, not next to anything at all, and least of all, not even next to a house, gives you 0 points. So that one, 0 points. This one, 1 point. But only 1 because it's still only adjacent to a house. The only way to make it worth 2 points is if you make it also adjacent to a factory. Then it's worth 2 victory points. So a park is worth 2 victory points if it's adjacent to a house and a factory. And if it's only adjacent to a factory, you still get 1 victory point if it's adjacent to, obviously, a factory. That's how all of the orientation of these tiles and these buildings and obviously roads will function and how you get victory points. But basically, it's whoever has the most victory points after that, that will obviously win the game. Now, if you ever forget the orientation, there is this nice, hefty, thick tile that will basically, obviously, show you, you know, which tiles score you which points based on what is next to them. So this will help remind you of how to score, obviously. But that's how that's going to work. Also, while I'm saying that, this is the standard player board, okay? There's actually, this is actually a double-sided player board. So I'm not going to show you guys how the scoring works for the double-sided player board, because this is for people who've played at least once. But if you have your player board like this, then we still have this hefty guide here to show you how you're going to score victory points based on certain things. There's a beachfront on this version, which will change things up for certain tiles. Like, for instance, it changes the park a bit. If it's adjacent to a beachfront, it's still going to score you a point, while on the other side it doesn't. So it does change, it does add a little variability to your game. If you decide to play with this on occasion, you're going to score victory points based on certain things, certain placement of tiles in a different variety almost completely. But basically, yeah, that's what this is for, to help you, remind you of how to play, how many victory points you're going to get. So you can always look at this during the course of the game before you start placing your tiles out and strategize and all that jazz. So there's two of these, and they're both double-sided. So there's no reason why someone isn't going to be able to figure out what tiles they should place out before they do it, because you can just grab this and look. So that's pretty much how you play Shake That City. That's all you really need to know in order to play the game. There is a solo variant. So if you ever play the solo variant, you're going to add these tiles to your board. So let me just quickly do this. Okay, so let me place them out. You're going to place them out like this. It plays mostly the same with a slight difference when you play the solo variant. You're going to have these 4 construction tiles. These prevent you from placing tiles on them. You can't place tiles on these construction sites. That means you're limited to what you can place when you play solo mode. That means you're going to want to get rid of these. In fact, if you want to score points at the end of the game, you have to get rid of all 4 construction tiles too. So if you don't manage that, well, you get 0 points. That's bad, right? But the way you're going to get rid of these is you're going to have to get an orthogon, so right or left, but basically they have to be adjacent to each other. So you have to have 2 tiles matching the corresponding tile. So for instance, this tile here, if you had this house next to a shop like this, even though it doesn't exactly match that 100%, but it is adjacent to the right or left of it, then you're going to be able to get rid of this tile that way. Okay, so that's how you get rid of them. You're going to have to place certain tiles next to each other, adjacency, to get rid of them. That's how you get rid of them. But basically, that's like the main difference between the solo and the regular multiplayer mode. Everything else will be pretty much the same, with the exception of one other thing. So when you're playing the solo mode, okay, these here, you can never pick the biggest color of cubes. So when you're playing by yourself, we have 3 roads, okay, and 2 of the houses and 2 parks and 1 of each of the other colors. When you're playing solo, during almost every single round, you can't pick the biggest color that is out. So I wouldn't be able to pick, for instance, these 3 road cubes and put them out on my player board, because they're the most of that particular, of any of the colors in this particular round. So I'd have to pick one of the other colors, like the 2 red or the 2 green, for instance. But I wouldn't be able to pick, obviously, the most of a particular color. The only way I could pick a color is if there was only 3 colors in this equation, and there was 3 of each of them. Then, if it was a tie, then I would be allowed to pick a color of my choice if it was all, like I said, 3, 3, and 3. But otherwise, yeah, I'd have to pick a color that has less cubes out for it. Except for the last 3 rounds. when you get to the 13th round, you can pick the largest color if you want to. So, but of course, you still have to follow the guidelines and rules of placing tiles out and being able to do so in that exact orientation. Basically, that's everything you need to know in order to play. Oh, and in solo mode. So, in order to win the game, you have to score at least 55 points in order to win the solo variant. If you manage to score 55 points, you win. If you don't, you lose. And I played solo already, and you'll notice I only got 38 points, so I lost. So that's how you play. So the solo is definitely a little challenging for sure. So thank you guys for watching this video. I think that's everything you need to know in order to play Shake That City, whether you're playing this multiplayer or whether you're playing solo. Okay? And don't forget to leave me a like if you guys liked this video. Goodbye.